In the last video for this week, we're going to talk about Octavian's success as ruler of Rome after the fall of the Republic. And now, Octavian had not been a great general, but he was an amazing administrator. And he was also an amazing politician. And through his political skills, he was able to avoid Caesar's fate, avoid being assassinated, and managed to peacefully transition Rome from a republic to a principate. And there were a couple of keys to this success. First of all, he worked with the senators. He recognized their wealth and influence was necessary for him to govern effectively, and he was able to appease the different factions. He also presented himself not as a king and a tyrant, but as someone who was restoring the republic and guaranteeing its institutions after the disastrous civil wars and violence of the previous generation. And so he's going to show or present his takeover of the Republic using the terminology of ancient Rome. He begins by holding the office of consul every year, which gives him the power of imperium. And between 36 and 30, the years 36 and 30, he also combined it with the privileges of a tribune. That means there's something holy about him, his body cannot be harmed, he has the ability to veto legislation. And so this means that every senator considering proposing any legislation consulted with him beforehand. And so the tribunes had been the check on the power of the Senate, and now Octavian, who's going to start calling himself Augustus, holds that, as well as the power of the consul to command Roman armies. He then offers to renounce all his powers. He says, I came here, it's a bad situation, I've restored the Republic, I'm willing to give these powers back to the Senate and to the Roman people. And it's a masterstroke because then the Senate restores all power to him and gives him this title of Augustus. And at this point, the Senate know that he's too powerful not to be given these titles. That if they don't give the titles back to him, then he's going to be out there. He's going to be kind of like a rival government. People are going to look to him to decide what they should do. And so this is why we say that the Roman Empire, in terms of Rome being governed by an emperor, begins in the year 27. And it was based on the principle that the emperor and the Senate worked together to govern the empire. And so the emperor still presented himself as the greatest of the senators, but still one of a number of senators. In the year 13, Augustus took the title of Pontifex Maximus and became the head of the state religion of Rome, as well as the head of government. And so this means that he now fully controls Roman government. He's the head of Roman society. But at the same time, he does not emphasize his power. He emphasizes that he lives very humbly. He doesn't want to raise up political rivals. And he claims that the power that he holds is necessary to maintain the institutions of the Republic. The other part of Augustus' success is that he rules for 40 years until his death in the year 14. And by this point, there was no one alive who could remember the Republic. Or if they could, all they could remember was the version that was just racked with civil war and totally dysfunctional. And so we tend to think of a sort of Star Wars impression of this. You have this glorious republic, and then it's replaced by kind of an evil emperor. But we have to remember that by the time of Augustus' death, the Principate, the empire that he had developed, actually did a better job of providing peace for the Roman Empire and of dealing with the crises and the challenges that Roman citizens were facing than the Republic was able to in its final years. Move on to the next slide now and talk about Augustus's reorganization of the empire. Augustus develops more consistent borders for the empire. He ends the policy of sort of constant expansion. Instead, he establishes defensible borders like the Sahara Desert, which required only one legion, which is about 6,000 men, to defend it. Egypt became the emperor's personal province. Why is this? It's because Egypt provides tons and tons of food. The food to feed great cities like Rome, the richest province of the empire. And so this will enable him to retain his power. To the east, he negotiates a peace with the Parthians. The Romans don't want to mess with them anymore. And to the north, he secures the river Danube powerful river that it was difficult to cross as the empire's northern border. He did attempt to move north of the border, but was very unsuccessful, and Roman legions were ambushed and slaughtered by the Germans. And this was the most devastating defeat of Augustus's reign. And so after this point, he had established the Atlantic as one border, the Sahara Desert is another, peace with the Parthians, and the river Danube as the northern border. Augustus also controlled the provinces where armies were stationed: northern Spain, Gaul, Eastern Europe, and Syria. And so the other provinces were administered by the Senate. So this continued to give the Senate power. It gave Rome direct oversight over the provinces. It gave the Senate influence, but real power remained in the hands of Augustus, who controlled the military forces. We'll move on to the next slide now. Augustus also had to deal with the army. Remember, the army was responsible for putting him into power, but the army was also facing the main challenges that Rome was dealing with at this time. By the time that Augustus came to power, the army made up about 70% of the empire's expenditures each year. And so Augustus, first of all, reduced the size of the army, dramatically reduced the size of the army. So he's reducing the size of the army. That makes it a little more manageable. He's reducing the amount of campaigning that it's doing. Troops were stationed on the borders, which meant that they were less likely and less able to launch any kind of political action to overthrow the government. The army became much more of a garrison force and an engineering force. It was a smaller army. It was a more professional army. Soldiers were able to join the army who were not Italians and were not Romans. They learned to speak Latin. They were fully culturally integrated, saw themselves as Romans, saw themselves as fighting for their people by fighting for the Roman Empire. The soldiers were paid a yearly wage. At the end of their period of service, they received a retirement package of land or money. And so the idea of a patron-client relationship, we've talked about this a lot, it's an important part of Roman society, an important component of Roman society. This relationship was now transferred to the relationship between the emperor and the army. The emperor would look after the military, he would make sure you have no more impoverished veterans that we talked about at the beginning of this chapter, and at the same time the army would be loyal to the emperor. Move on to the next slide now. Augustus emphasized to the people that his rule was a period of peace and cultural achievement. So we've seen him achieve peace with the Senate that he needs in order to stay in power. We've seen him achieve peace with the army that he needs in order to stay in power. And now this is part of his public presentation to the inhabitants of the Roman Empire. He builds an altar dedicated to peace. And he builds a triumphal arch. And on one side, the arch lists all the consuls back to 509. On the other side, it lists all the generals who had been granted a triumph for success in war. And the message is that Augustus unites the consuls of the Republic, the great generals of the Republic. The altar of peace emphasizes that he is the one who has brought peace to Rome. Augustus also funded popular entertainment. Partly he did this to prevent any of the senators becoming popular by doing this. So he sponsors chariot races throughout Rome. This makes him popular with the people. He also encourages the idea of moral reform within Rome. I talked about how Rome is a conservative society. And so Augustus emphasizes the idea that the years of civil war were years when the gods punished the Romans for their moral failings. And so he encouraged marriage, childbearing, stable families. He lived a very ostentatiously simple life without any of the excesses of Egypt or Crassus or the very wealthy Romans. And so he became the dominant cultural influence in the empire, as well as the dominant political and the dominant military influence. And this success, as well as his economic successes in establishing a standardized system of coinage, in building a system of roads, in better integrating the empire and setting up paths to Roman citizenship for those who were not born Romans. This led to achievements such as the golden age of Roman literature that you can see on the last slide of the PowerPoint. And it also helped establish this transition from republic to empire was good for the Romans. It gave them a more peaceful and a more stable life. And this is the great success of Octavian.